Hey guys, welcome to the stream. So, this is the first stream of a few pages. Um, this is the book, Unbearable Lightness of Being. Just a few words before we start. Well, first of all, uh, if you can't hear me or anything like that, or if there's any technical issues, let me know in the chat and I'll try and fix that because this is still totally new. Everything is just getting started and there's no like editing on live. So anyway, I'll play a little bit of background music. If it's too loud or annoying, let me know. But yeah, so this is the book again, Unbearable Lightness of Being. Hopefully you've read it. If not, then that's okay. We're going to start with just like a brief overview of the book and a quick little non-spoilery review in case you haven't read it and you're interested in what the book is about and maybe want to read it in the future and like come back to the live stream and then see what we talked about. So yeah, also feel free to jump in and say anything at any time. Hey Sam, it's nice to see you here. For my testing, there's like maybe a 10-second-ish delay from when I talk and you actually see it. So, I'll definitely get to your comments as I see them. But yeah, good evening to you in Ireland. And hello to everyone, no matter where you are. But yeah, this will be an evolving process. Still a little shaking out the nerves a little bit. It's all brand new. Hopefully, though, a quick note about this whole book club thing in general. I'd like to do more of these. Maybe like once every couple months or like 6 weeks or something like that. Something that would give everybody enough lead time to get the book and read the book and like digest it before the actual book club. So yeah, anyway, we'll talk more about that later. But for the start of everything, let's just talk a little bit about the book in general, like what it's about, and some non-spoilerish thoughts on it that I had. Feel free to jump in at any time again. So, yeah, I mean, this book was recommended to me by my wife, and she's read it a couple times, but she hasn't read it recently. Anyway, she has been wanting me to read it for a long time, so I finally decided, why not make that the first book for our book club? And so, yeah, I mean, I was absolutely blown away by this book. Like, I really do think it's truly a modern classic. And the writing and the prose was some of the best I've read, like, anywhere. And I was totally impressed by how good it was and how interesting it was, and at times how challenging it was to get through, not really because of the actual writing itself. Like, the writing is actually quite easy to read and understand, but just the themes and the subject matter that Kundera goes into can get pretty heavy at times. I mean, in case the title wasn't indicative of that already. But a brief overview, in case you're new or anybody who's already read it, we can just start from there. So the book starts with the first main couple, so to speak, of the book, which is Tomas and Teresa. One other note I wanted to make is, I'm just a simple American, so I don't always know exactly how to pronounce everything and everyone's name, but I'm just going to say things the way that I read them in my mind. So yeah, the book starts with Tomas and Teresa comes and visits Tomas in his apartment, and she ends up staying with him for a long time. But Tomas is a brilliant surgeon and very promiscuous, and has many different relationships with many different mistresses all over, and this becomes a constant sort of tension between Tomas and Teresa as their relationship, continues to grow in different ways. And one of his main mistresses is Sabina, who also lives in Prague, and she's an artist. And then we find out that she later has a relationship with a man named Franz, who is also married to a different woman named Marie Claude. And then the book sort of follows each of these characters through different stages in their life and the different struggles that they face, not only with the relationships they have with each other, but just the general lightness of being, just the general ways that they live and the things that they do. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's sort of the general overview. And from there, I guess we can sort of start diving into the book. Let me know if there's anything specific you want to talk about. I have a big list of things that we could potentially talk about. And here on my screen, is it on that side or that side? But I have this ebook, and I've done a bunch of highlights so we can check out my different highlighted passages and maybe read them, go over them, talk about them. I guess one of the main things that I thought was really interesting and impressive about this book was the way that he changes his narrative tone so frequently and so often, but he does it in a way that is almost unnoticeable. It's like as he talks about each different character in the book, he changes the perspective to be from their perspective and talks about things their way. And then that sort of further develops their characters and also gives them, it gives you sort of a more like intimate look at their life, I feel like. And it gives you a better understanding of who they are and how they think and how they feel. And I guess one thing that I found really interesting about that, let's see. If we go to page 221, where is that? Yeah, so right, yeah, this is what I wanted to bring up, I guess, as when it comes to this topic, because I thought it was so interesting how right here, so just a bit of context. This is when Tomas is this is right after he meets with his son Simon and the editor from the paper, and they ask him to sign the petition asking the government to free the political prisoners. And then Tomas declines their request to sign the petition. And then this is when the narrator just suddenly breaks the fourth wall, so to speak. I don't know if that's the right word for a novel as opposed to like a TV show. But he just changes the tone so completely that he starts talking directly to the reader, which I thought was really interesting. So I'll just read this passage real quick, and then maybe we can dissect it a little bit. So again, this is right after he declined signing the papers. And that was because he had thought that the best thing he could do would, whatever he could do it in his power to protect Teresa. So then we begin here on page 220, chapter 15. So, see here. I'll just read it from the screen. Several days later, he read about the petition in the papers. There was not a word, of course, about its being a politely worded plea for the release of political prisoners. None of the papers cited a single sentence from the short text. Instead, they went on at great length and in vague, menacing terms about an anti-state proclamation meant to lay the foundation for a new campaign against socialism. They also listed all the signatories, accompanying each of their names with slanderous attacks that gave Tomas gooseflesh. Not that it was unexpected. The fact that any public undertaking, meeting, petition, street gathering, not organized by the Communist Party was automatically considered illegal and endangered all the participants was common knowledge. But it may have made him sorrier he had not signed the petition. Why hadn't he signed? He could no longer quite remember what had prompted his decision, and once more I see him the way he appeared to me at the very beginning of the novel, standing at the window and staring across the courtyard at the walls opposite. And so here's when he breaks to really just talk directly to the reader. This is the image from which he was born. As I have pointed out before, characters are not born like people, of women. They are born of a situation, a sentence, a metaphor containing, in a nutshell, a basic human possibility that the author thinks no one else has discovered or said something essential about. But isn't it true that an author can only write about himself? Staring impotently across a courtyard, at a loss for what to do, hearing the pertinacious rumbling of one's own stomach during a moment of love, betraying yet lacking the will to abandon the glamorous path of betrayal, raising one's fist with the crowds in the Grand March, displaying one's wit before hidden microphones. I have known all these situations. I have experienced them myself. Yet none of them has given rise to the person my curriculum vitae and I represent. The characters in my novels are my own unrealized possibilities. That is why I am equally fond of them and equally horrified by them. Each one has crossed a border that I myself have circumvented. It is that crossed border, the border beyond which my own I ends, which attracts me most. For beyond that border begins the secret the novel asks about. The novel is not the author's confession. It is an investigation of human life in the trap the world has become. Ah yeah, Sam, I just saw your comment. Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I feel like that's exactly why I brought up this quote from the book. It's so interesting the way that, and this is just one example of how he'll do this. I think this is the most sort of stark example of him directly talking to the reader. But, it definitely falls in line, I think, with all of the other stuff, all the other ways he does it throughout the book. And it's really, it creates this sort of meta, self-referential take, I feel, that makes the book feel, like you said, Sam, it lets it avoid the feeling of being preachy or too self-interested, because it removes sort of that layer of any sort of pretension. At least that's how it came off to me. Like, it really allows you to feel like, he wrote the book to, like he said, as an investigation of human life in the trap the world has become. And it's like, also it's like we can't exactly take everything that he says as the narrator at face value, because the narrator himself, I feel, is another character in the book, but certainly more indicative of Kundera's personal perspective than, any of his individual characters. And so I feel like this passage in particular was very representative of how he was able to, like you said, like talk directly to the reader and sort of break that barrier down between, just a sort of lecture or preaching or, seminar or something like that, and make it more personal and more relatable, and bridge the gap between author, narrator, and reader. Yeah, exactly. I think I agree with you. It's like through that context of hearing or reading, what the author says through the narrator, it's like you really get to better. It puts you in a state where, or at least the way I saw it, it puts you in a state where you can see the characters for what they are, which is characters. It really sort of, to me, brings everything home, where it's like, in any book, right, the characters are more than simply characters. They're vehicles for the author to speak through the characters. But especially in this book, where like the subject matter is so philosophical, it's so political, it's so, deeply personal to the author, especially, since Kundera himself lived through the sort of events of the book, and he is Czech and eventually moved to France, just like the character, Sabina in his book. And, there are, I'm sure, facets of himself in each character of the book. And so they are able to, give slices of his perspective and slices of who he is and what he's been through, and, reveal slices of more than just himself, but the world at large, and his reaction and people's reaction, and the ways we all cope and understand the way the world is. So, I guess that sort of naturally, actually one of the things that I thought was specifically interesting about this quote was he talks about the Grand March, which he doesn't actually bring up until much later in the book with Franz in Cambodia. But that's sort of why I feel that, even though this is not actually at the end of the book, it's almost like you could remove this passage and this is like almost like a direct insight into part of his, overall theory of what he's trying to get across. So, that's, I guess, the one of my main points, which was the prose and perspective shift. Maybe something that will help sort of broaden this discussion would be to talk specifically about, the different characters and their relationships and the sort of power dynamics between them. So, okay, I guess let's start off this way. The book starts with Tomas and how Teresa comes to visit him. And then, so first off, we get the initial perspective of Tomas and the way that he sees Teresa when she comes to visit him, which is, she's like a young girl who comes from the countryside, and she kind of just whirlwinds into his life. He's not used to falling in love. In fact, it's possible he had never been in love with anybody, not even like his first wife or any of his mistresses. The way he sort of describes it feels that way. And then Teresa comes and she is weak. And there's this weakness and strength that like pervades through his explanation and discussion of these two characters throughout the book. Especially near the end, he talks more about it. But it's like Teresa has a weakness that draws her to Tomas because she feels he is strong. And this is kind of evidenced by her being drawn to him because he was reading the book, and she felt that knowledge and education and books were that secret club that she was a part of when she read. But then eventually, she brought Anna Karenina with her when she met Tomas, which is why they named their dog Karenin. And then you know, she eventually feels like that book was the book she brought with her was sort of fake, like as though she didn't really belong. And then, later on in the book, we, especially near the end there, we hear that, or we read that Teresa felt that she was using her weakness in order to sort of pull Thomas along the way each time. Like when they first left Prague, or well, she first came there and she sort of like seduced Tomas with her weakness. And then they left Prague, and then they came back, and then they went to the countryside. And all of these were different ways that she was quote unquote weak, but Tomas felt compelled to do these things because he was drawn to her and his and the Beethoven's Es muss sein, which is, a whole other thing. And then, so then that's like sort of in a nutshell Tomas and Teresa's relationship. I mean, of course there are many things we could dive into further from there, but as a brief overview, that's where they start and come from. And then in the sort of middle there, Tomas and Teresa get like interconnected with Sabina, who is Tomas's longtime mistress, and they have their own special relationship. And it's hard to call it love, but it's definitely something, it's a special relationship for both of them that has changed the way that the relationship between him and Teresa worked out, and just in general the way that Tomas sort of felt about women, I guess. So then, we introduce this character Sabina, who is an artist and a painter, and then Teresa has dreams about her, and this is back again where the sort of power dynamics come into play, because Sabina has this like power over Teresa as the mistress that Tomas can never stop seeing. Sabina always feels weak in the face of all of Tomas's mistresses because she has this, like he says in one portion of the book, she feels that her fidelity is the single column that holds up their relationship. And so, this is not a two-way street. Like, Tomas constantly, has many different encounters with women all over the place, and this is a constant straining point in their relationship. But for Tomas, it's almost like he never really even considered ending his various affairs with different women just because Teresa came into his life. And so Sabina is sort of the ultimate representation of this fact, I think, to Teresa. And so the power dynamic is, like, Sabina holds like a power over both Tomas and Teresa, but more indirectly to Teresa. And like, so then, and then, we introduce Franz when we get to Sabina's main story, who has his own wife, and Sabina is his mistress, but he's not as promiscuous as Tomas. He just has his wife, Marie Claude, and then he has Sabina. So then you have their relationship, which grows in a different way, which is sort of interesting because they are older when they start their relationship. Yeah, Sam, I think that's very interesting, and I agree with you. Especially in the beginning, when I first started reading the book, I wasn't really a fan of Tomas. And right. Yeah, it is very interesting the way that they're depicted in the book, and this idea of like weakness and strength. And as an aside note, it does make me wonder what the original Czech writing of the book was. I wonder if he used the words weakness and strength? I don't have an answer to that, just something I wondered. But yeah, no, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from. Like, it doesn't feel fair when you read the book to call Teresa weak and to call Tomas strong, because especially like in modern culture, when you consider, the different ways we view the dynamics of relationships between, not just men and women, but any kind of romantic relationship. And it doesn't feel fair just to call him the man as strong and the woman as weak. And like, I feel like at least from my perspective, one of the main points why he at least used the weak and strong terminology was because it is another literary way of expressing the dichotomy between them. Like, every relationship in the story, I think, has this sort of eternal push and pull of like the lightness and the heaviness, and I think weakness and strength is just another shade of that. And yeah, I totally like agree with you. Tomas's pursuit, his unending pursuit of intellectualism and the womanizing, is what causes the heaviness in the others around him and in Teresa. And this is sort of what makes their relationship work. I don't know if work is really the right word, but it makes it's what sort of creates the harmony of their relationship. It's what allows them to exist as a relationship for a period of time, because they have, the scales of heaviness and lightness. And going back to Sabina, and this is again what we see with Sabina, because her whole life has felt this sort of like desire, like quest for betrayal. Like, everything in her life is about betraying like one another. Yeah, I could see definitely what you mean. Yeah, she certainly has a lot of doubts about herself, and she's constantly, Teresa and Tomas. Teresa is definitely second guessing herself all the time, and I think a part of that, historically within the context of the characters, is also just like how Teresa is, she sort of represents this innocence, this ignorance and innocence that comes from like being a country girl who's like raised by her mother to, oh no, you're not interrupting at all, you're good. I'm happy for the discussion, actually. But yeah, like, it's great. Like, she is like put into a place of weakness by her mother growing up, because her mother was, I mean, they have a very sordid relationship, but her mother, lost her beauty and her vitality and her youth. And so as she was raising Teresa, she was constantly belittling her and like telling her that her body is worthless. It's just like every other body, and she doesn't have a right to privacy, and she is just some, like dumb country girl. And, that's what drove Teresa away, is like that feeling of constantly being berated and belittled by her mother. But then it drives her into the arms of Tomas, who in a lot of ways does the same thing, just indirectly, like more so through his womanizing and the way he doesn't treat her with the same respect and fidelity that she gives him. And so I think, like, in that sense, the weakness, so to speak, of Teresa stems from her upbringing and her innocence and her ignorance of the world at large. And she's certainly not a weak person at all. Like, she has gone through so much and still, strives to live the best life that she feels that she can. And like, from a personal perspective, I feel that she is actually a very strong character. She has gone through so much, but like in relation and context to Tomas, especially coming from her background. She constantly feels as though she is weak because he's done so much. He is a surgeon, he's educated, he's worldly, he's visited many places, he has a lot of life experience that she doesn't have, and he sort of just takes what he wants. But yeah, no, yeah, it is completely, it's sad. It's sad hearing that. It's sad seeing the perspective from Teresa, and her being labeled as weak, and her being, it's as if she can't do things for herself or by herself. Oh yeah, and which really actually brings up an interesting point was the crow. Let me try and find what page that was. Where was the crow? Oh, why isn't the search working? Dang. Okay, so 159. Okay, yeah, so this... Yeah, this is something that I found really interesting. So when I first read this passage about the crow, I was confused. Like, I wasn't really sure exactly what the crow represented. But let me take a moment and... Yeah, it's a little long, so I'm not going to read the whole passage. But basically, what happens is Teresa is walking Karenine, and she sees some children that had buried a crow that was still alive, like half buried it. And she goes over and digs up the crow and sees it's dying, essentially. It's clearly doesn't have long to live. It's like oozing some yellow liquid, and it can barely, like squawk or move its wings. And then she digs it up from the ground, breaking her fingernail, starts bleeding, and then she wraps it up in, I think, her scarf or something like that, and she brings it inside, and she is totally distraught at this crow, and like right here. So she had brought it in. There was a thick yellow liquid oozing from it. She made a bed of old rags to protect it from the cold tiles. From time to time, the bird would give a hopeless flap of its lame wing and raise its beak as a reproach. She sat transfixed on the edge of the bath, unable to take her eyes off the dying crow. In its solitude and desolation, she saw a reflection of her own life, of her own fate, and she repeated several times to herself, "I have no one left in the world but Tomas." Did her adventure with the engineer teach her that casual sex had nothing to do with love, that it is light, weightless? Was she calmer now? Not in the least. So, this is directly juxtaposed with her meeting her sexual encounter with the engineer, who she was constantly paranoid about it being the secret police and everything. But I think at this point she was more concerned about just the idea of having a sexual encounter with another man that was not Tomas, something that challenged her idea of fidelity and her relationship with him. And so, when I first read this, I was confused about what the meaning of the crow was. Eventually the crow does die, and that's all it is. But in particular, this line is interesting. In its solitude and desolation, she saw a reflection of her own fate, and she repeated several times to herself, "I have no one left in the world but Tomas." And so to me, the reason I bring this up particularly right now is because we were talking about this quote-unquote weakness of Teresa and the strength of Tomas. And I think that after thinking about this for a while, that's what sort of the parallel is here in this juxtaposition. It's like the crow is dying. It's weak. It's infinitely weak. It has no power. Like children were burying it alive. And it took, the weak person of Teresa to dig it out of the ground and try and help it and save it and everything. But, she was unable to. But I think like you get this parallel and this juxtaposition between Teresa as the quote unquote weak one and the crow as being weak. And she felt connected and intertwined to this crow in a way that it was maybe a representation of her own self and her own life. And perhaps, she felt that she was being buried alive by the people with the umbrellas, by Tomas's infidelity, by her inability to just live the sort of life and have the sort of relationship that she wanted. Yeah, that is really interesting, Sam. Yeah, I think you're right. She does begin to find some inner strength. And I think shortly after this is when she suggests to Tomas that they move to the countryside. And yeah, you're totally right. The crow exists in this state of not dead, but not alive. It's sort of in this in between where it's right on the precipice of death, which, again, is sort of reflective of Teresa herself, because as we know later on, not long after this, she too meets her own demise. And maybe, that's what, they were saying here, what the author was saying here too, where she saw a reflection of her own fate, and another parallel is like, perhaps Tomas could be, Teresa in this situation. If Teresa's the crow, maybe Tomas is the one, that dug her out. And I'm not really sure. There's a lot of ways I'm sure you could take this scene, but the other thing that I think is really interesting about it is how the moments after with the engineer, the secret police, the hilltop execution. Yeah, definitely. So this all comes at a time, I guess for more context surrounding this, it's like Teresa feels trapped in so many different ways, because she now has to work in this bar, like with very unpleasant people who are constantly sexually harassing her and talking down to her. And it's almost like she's back in her hometown working, at the little restaurant or whatever they had. And it's because Tomas is now a window washer. And then now she's worried constantly about the secret police, and that she is being followed and manipulated. And then her encounter with the engineer was another way of her being manipulated because of Tomas's involvement with, his letter to the editor and the way he got political. Yeah, the bar is a completely terrible place for Teresa, and it's very sad she had to work there. But yeah, so, this all comes at a time where she's feeling completely trapped by the world around her. And I think that dream of her being nearly executed by the firing squad was very much so, coalescing of all these factors, her just being totally trapped and feeling like she's completely indebted to and under the spell of Tomas, and she has to, follow everything that he says, and she has to do, what's right and what will help them the most. But yet there's this part of her that's like crying out that like this isn't right, that it's not what she wants. And that's why, at the end of the dream, she protests, and they don't end up shooting her. But then we see this juxtaposed with the real world, where she met with the engineer, and she says I don't have the quote highlighted. Oh, yeah, here it is. But it wasn't my choice. And so she says that in the firing squad, and then that's what gets them to stop. But this was her dream. But then in real life, she's in the room with the man, and then she says them again. She says it aloud. But it wasn't my choice. But in the complete opposite of her dream, in reality, the words have no meaning. The words have no power. The man doesn't stop. He just strengthens his resolve. And, they end up, having their encounter. And, all of these factors, I think, really strongly contributed to her state of mind when it came to that crow, and when it came to her attempting to save it, even though everyone knew that it was a futile effort. But I guess this was her one way of trying to exert what little strength she had in order to come to terms with where she is and the way her life is. And perhaps this whole encounter with the crow, with the engineer, is what gave her the strength to finally tell Tomas that she felt she needed to leave. They needed to leave. They needed to just be together in the countryside, away from it all. And, we don't find out until much later, but the crow actually had a significant impact on Tomas, because when he is, again, talking to his son and the editor, and he refuses to sign the petition, he says, quote, as he is declining, he says, "It is much more important to dig a half-buried crow out of the ground than to send petitions to a president." And so here, I think, why this is interesting is because we see Teresa using that weakness, quote unquote, the weakness that, we're constantly told is her, her lack of power, her lack of ability. And she, in that moment of weakness, tries her best to use what strength she has to save this crow. And it actually very deeply affected Tomas in a way that I don't think Teresa premeditated or even knew about. Maybe she never really understood the impact that one action had. But for Tomas, when he was considering whether or not to sign this petition, considering whether or not to become more politically involved, to become more of a target for the secret police, he actually decided that this isn't right, that this is the wrong path to take, even though it would bring him closer to his son, even though it would sort of give him that kind of like righteous, moral, political high ground. He decided that he finally realized that Teresa was more important to him than any of those things. And so that act of her, digging out a half-buried crow, the act of her trying to save its life, the act of her showing him her strength through her weakness, I think is what finally allowed Tomas to change fundamentally, like who he is. Yeah, exactly. Better late than never, right? And so, since we're already, since we're on the whole train of Tomas and Teresa and we've gotten this far, let's just keep going with it. And, so they eventually go to the countryside and they buy, like a small cottage or house. And I guess, there's a lot of things to unpack there, but one of the main things I wanted to talk about there also was the her final dream. Where, oh, that's kitsch. That's a good one, but we'll come back to that. Yeah, right here. So she has her final dream, which is, not at this point, they've been living in the countryside. They're more or less established. They have their own roles. They have their own jobs. Tomas drives the truck. Teresa tends to the cows. And then one day, she sees Tomas changing the tire on his car, and she notices that his hair is now white. And I wish I had the quote here. Let me see if I can find it. But yeah, so she sees that his hair is white, which is what she realizes that that's what she had always actually wanted. She was always looking for, oh, I guess this current topic thing isn't that useful. But she realizes that she had always wanted to have Tomas be, oh no, where did that go? Yeah, have Tomas be old, because that finally bridges the gap between their two sort of relative strength levels. And then, like, the reason I bring up Tomas being old and having white hair is because I personally felt like that was a direct connection to her dream in which he becomes a rabbit. Because once he, so in her dream, quickly, as a recap, she has a dream that Tomas is reading a letter, and the letter is like from the secret police, and then it tells them to go to a certain place, and then they get on a plane and they go, and once they get off the plane, there's essentially another firing squad, and the firing squad points at Tomas and shoots him, and he crumples and his body crumples, but instead of falling on the ground and dying, he turns into a rabbit and scurries away, and the guard catches him, and then Teresa carries the rabbit and brings it with her back to Prague and finds her house where she had lived with her mom and dad as a small girl. But now there were old people there who were her great-grandfather and great-grandmother instead of her parents. But she wanted to be alone with her animal. And then this was something that I didn't realize till now. The table had a lamp on it, a lamp that had never stopped burning in anticipation of her return, and on the lamp perched a butterfly with two large eyes painted on its widespread wings. Teresa knew she was at her goal. She lay down on the bed and pressed the rabbit to her face. Yeah, the butterfly. So that's exactly what happens at the end of the book. There's a butterfly in their room when they go to the hotel. But anyway, I wanted to bring this up because, again, going back to the power dynamic in their relationship, I think that this is signifying that Teresa finally feels that the power has shifted, and that it's not so much that she is stronger than Tomas, or maybe it is because he's a rabbit, but like the way I saw it was more that now there doesn't have to be like a weak one and a strong one. Like Tomas has lost all of his strength. So maybe it is Teresa is stronger now because she is still herself and he is a rabbit. He's old, he has white hair, and so now she can better take care of him. But in any case, the power dynamic has shifted, which to me was the key point. And now, because of that, they can finally sort of live on an equal ground and have a sort of more equal relationship, where it's not so much about Teresa feeling weak and needing to be comforted and chased by Tomas, who is strong. It's more about their symbiosis, their coming together, their reconciliation. And I think this is also evidenced by the way that Tomas digs the grave for Karenine exactly the way that Teresa had laid out for him, and the way that Teresa handled Karenine's death. And at first Tomas protested a little bit, but then eventually just let her do her own thing and just, acquiesced and listened to the way that Teresa felt. And so, finally we get to the very end where they are together, and they meet with like the village chief and the young guy, and they go off all together to the hotel, and she dances with the two guys and then Tomas, and like I don't know, maybe I'm reading into it more, but I felt that like in a way that signified the again, the power shift in their relationship and the dynamic between them, because now Teresa was the one dancing with other men. Just how, like, before, Tomas used to dance, quote unquote, with other women. And in this scenario, nobody is like getting jealous. Nobody is, it's just, they're just having a good time and they're finally at harmony with one another. Yeah, exactly. Her weakness transformed into strength through her kindness and caring. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And yeah, specifically towards animals. And that's definitely another thing that I would like to talk about. But yeah, just to wrap this portion up, this is where we finally get to the very end of the book. And, we already know at this point because they told us earlier, but Tomas and Teresa eventually would die in a truck when their truck crashes and falls off the hill and they get squashed. I think the way I understood it was this basically happens right after they go to the hotel. Like they stay the night at the hotel after they go dancing, and on their way home is when they crash and die. And this is, I think, like a very bittersweet ending to their relationship, because in one way it's very sad, right? Like they obviously were still relatively young. Like maybe they could have lived another 20 or 30 years or more in harmony, in peace. But at the same time, I think the sweetness of the bittersweet is in that they finally got to a point in their relationship where they felt balanced, where Tomas was no longer seeking, his version of the truth, trying to, use his scalpel to dissect not only his patients, but the women he was seeing, And Teresa was no longer chasing some idea of strength. She had found the strength in her relationship with Tomas and her relationship with the animals and her place in the country and just a general peace with like where her life had come to. And so I think that this ending, the sweetness of it is in that they died at sort of the ultimate apex of their relationship. It's like they were able to resolve their issues. They were able to resolve their dynamic, their power dynamic. They were able to come to a place where they were on equal ground. And, just like, if you're like, telling jokes or in a meeting or something and you go off on a high note, right? Like that's what people remember. And I feel like that's sort of how their lives ended. They went out on a high note. Like they had so many struggles and so many challenges and, so many different things happened to them and their relationship and the ways they saw each other. But at the end, I felt that they were able to come to a place where their relationship had this homeostasis, had this harmony between them. And so them dying at that moment sort of solidified that moment forever. But I totally get what you mean. It was a struggle to read Tomas and Teresa earlier, especially, when they had so many difficulties in the ways they talked to each other, the ways they didn't talk to each other, the like 2-year vacation Tomas took where they lived together, but he never saw her or like tended to her. Yeah, that was rough. But ultimately I feel that their ending was sort of the perfect encapsulation of maybe the overarching thesis of the book, the unbearable lightness of being. And I think that's exactly what this bittersweet feeling is. It's this unbearable lightness. It's this understanding that ultimately, what did their lives mean? What did the things they pursue mean? What did it mean to go through all these motions? What did it mean to have these dreams? What did it mean to sleep with hundreds of women over the years? What did it mean to, have this relationship with your mother and then come to the city and be a photographer and give it all up and rescue a dying crow or attempt to and move to the country? It's like in the end, our lives are as meaningful as we say they are. And, if we are just an infinite procession of lives and different words that may or may not be repeated ad infinitum, then you could say, what's the point of it all, right? And I think that's the lightness of it all. And that in itself is why it becomes unbearable, because it makes you feel, or at least, in my opinion, you get this feeling that like, what's the point, right? Like, why do we do the things we do? Why do we live the way we live? Why are we compelled to do the things we do, And I think that is sort of the quote unquote unbearable lightness of it all. And just sort of as a segue, I think what really fits well into this discussion is where is this? Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here for a sec. But the different philosophical, I don't know, what's the word? Arguments, musings that he brings up. So you have so he first starts with Parmenides, right? Who he talks about through the book as the one who has the negative turning into the positive, where it's like the heaviness, the burden becomes light. And then Beethoven, which is juxtaposed with Beethoven, the Es muss sein, which, is like his symphony, which is saying like, it must be so. And then but then he talks about the origin of that, which is actually that, I don't know how much of this is true, I didn't look it up, but in the book he talks about how Es muss sein started as something trivial. It was just, I forget exactly where it was, but he talks about how like it was Beethoven talking with like his friend or colleague, and it was something trivial that he first wrote the lyrics about. But then over time, the triviality dropped off, and Es muss sein became a message of great weight and importance. And Thomas uses this idea throughout the novel as his sort of calling, like, his practice as a doctor, as a surgeon, is his Es muss sein. His like the love, the actual love of his life was that woman in his dream, that ethereal, perfect woman who he would never have. That was like the Es muss sein of his love. And Teresa represented the opposite of his Es muss sein. And so, going back to the sort of philosophical overview, so we have Parmenides and Beethoven who are juxtaposed. Parmenides turning the burden, the negative, into the positive, the burden into the light, and Beethoven turning the lightness into the heaviness. And then you have Descartes, who said that man is master and proprietor of nature, as if like we need to control everything, and that animals have no actual senses of emotion, and they are merely mechanical animals. I forgot the Latin term, but they're just essentially machines, and like anytime they cry out or anything, that's just the machine malfunctioning. And then you have that juxtaposed with Nietzsche, who right before his sort of psychotic break, I guess, it's arguable, but he was grabbed, like put his arm around a horse's neck and apologized for Descartes and the way we've like thought about animals. And so I guess and then the other big one I felt was when he talked about Plato's Symposium, where Thomas was struggling. Where's that? 238. Yeah, so Plato's Symposium, people were hermaphrodites until God split them in two, and now all the halves wander the world over, seeking one another. Love is a longing for the half of ourselves we have lost. And so, I feel like all four of these, five of these guys, I think there may have been one or two others, but I feel like they all sort of contribute to the same thing that we were just talking about with the conclusion of Tomas and Teresa's story, which is this unbearable lightness of being, the title of the book, right? It's that, like, there is this inherent dichotomy in the world that we inhabit, in the way that we view the world, in the way that we think about the world, in the way that we interact with not only the world around us, but the relationships we have, and the people that we love, and the people that we hate, and everything in between. And I think that this was just all these different philosophies and philosophers that he brings up are another way of expressing this the sort of overarching thesis of the entire novel, which I feel like Tomas and Teresa's relationship sort of perfectly encapsulates. It's this, this sort of like unbearable, like very, very difficult to maintain heaviness, but at the same time, just something that, feels almost trivial when you looked at it from a specific perspective. Animal cruelty and the combination of his dominion of animals. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that was a very interesting part of the book too, was the way that he used animals and the way that they were talked about in the book. So yeah, let me see if I can, where was that? Descartes 288. Yeah, so yeah, no, that's something I would like to talk about too, is like the way, the musings on animal cruelty. And so he brings up Descartes. So this is when Teresa is on her like new job on the farm, tending to the cows, and right here in this passage it says, even though Genesis says that God gave man dominion over all animals, we can also construe it to mean that he merely entrusted them to man's care. Man was not the planet's master, merely its administrator, and therefore eventually responsible for his administration. Descartes took a decisive step forward. He made man Latin, which means the master and proprietor of nature. And surely there is a deep connection between that step and the fact that he was also the one who point-blank denied animals a soul. Man is master and proprietor, says Descartes, whereas the beast is merely an automaton, an animated machine, a machina animata. When an animal laments, it is not a lament, it is merely the rasp of a poorly functioning mechanism. When a wagon wheel grates, the wagon is not in pain, it simply needs oiling. Thus, we have no reason to grieve for a dog being carved up alive in the laboratory. And so, I mean, I certainly think this is a very archaic way of thinking about animals. I mean, I'm sure people still think that, but I certainly don't. But he was certainly, I think, making a point here that, this is just a way, that people felt about animals and like thought animals are. But like, also to juxtapose this, he talks about, like to actually immediately juxtapose this with like almost the complete opposite is when he talks about carronine and specifically, carronine's cancer. And this, I mean, honestly, for me, this was the hardest part of the book to read emotionally. I felt really, really bad about carronine's death. it's just, I guess it's just hard to see like innocence like that suffering. But the thing that I wanted to bring up specifically about that was the yes, 309. Let me see here. I'm not sure exactly where it was, but anyway, this is kind of off the top of my head, but he talks about how Karenine, as a dog, has this idyllic relationship with paradise that man is unable to achieve, because man, I wish I could find where this was, but basically the innocence of dogs allows them to be in touch with quote unquote paradise. Like, they have this idyllic relationship where they are not bound by the same sort of wheel of suffering that we as humans are, because humans are always seeking something new, seeking something different, seeking to get out of their situation, whereas dogs are excited for the repetition, and they don't think about the world in the same way that we do, and so they don't suffer in the same way that we do. And so, he brings up this idea of the idyllic. Okay, here it is. 298. I found it. So yeah, here is specifically, yes. So Teresa accepted Karenine for what he was. She did not try to make him over in her image. She agreed from the outset with his dog's life, did not wish to deprive him of it, did not envy him his secret intrigues. The reason she trained him was not to transform him, as a husband tries to reform his wife and a wife her husband, but to provide him with the elementary language that enabled them to communicate and live together. Then, too, no one forced her to love Karenine. Love for dogs is voluntary. Teresa was again reminded of her mother, and regretted everything that had happened between them. If her mother had been one of the anonymous women in the village, she might well have found her easygoing coarseness agreeable. Oh, if only her mother had been a stranger! From childhood on, Teresa had been ashamed of the way her mother occupied the features of her face and confiscated her eye. What made it even worse was that the age-old imperative of "love your father and mother" forced her to agree with that occupation, to call the aggression love. It was not her mother's fault that Teresa broke with her. Teresa broke with her not because she was the mother she was, but because she was a mother. But most of all, no one can give anyone else the gift of idol. Only an animal can do so, because only animals were not expelled from paradise. The love between dog and man is idyllic. It knows no conflicts, no hair-raising scenes, it knows no development. Karenine surrounded Teresa and Tomas with a life based on repetition, and he expected the same from them. If Karenine had been a person instead of a dog, he would surely have long since said to Teresa, "Oh, my camera is overheating, so I'm gonna just do this so you guys can see some of my notes here." But yeah, if Karenine had been a person instead of a dog, he would surely have long since said to Teresa, "Look, I'm sick and tired of carrying that roll in my mouth every day. Can't you come up with something different?" And therein lies the whole of man's plight. Human time does not turn in a circle. It runs ahead in a straight line. This is why man cannot be happy. Happiness is the longing for repetition. Yes, happiness is the longing for repetition, Teresa said to herself. So, I think that this is the, sort of, I think to me this was Kundera's sort of argument in the way of animals and the significance that they have in this book, and the significance Karenine had in the book, and why he's on the cover in this version of the novel, and also why he was just the whole relationship of Karenine in the book and all the animals and everything. I think that this was a way. So I feel like this really explains how, the relationship that Teresa had with Karenine and Tomas had with Karenine, and like why earlier in the book he talks about Karenine's routine of like always going to get a bread roll every day and going on walks and everything like that, because ultimately, animals, and in this case specifically Karenine, represent the sort of are perfectly encapsulating the whole theory, which is the lightness of being. They are able to live life always happy with the repetition. They're longing for the repetition, which I think just perfectly goes back to the whole thing of the book, and talking about how what are our lives? They may possibly be an endless set of repetitions that come and go forever, and we are just but one iteration of them. And so really the key to happiness that humans aren't capable of achieving is to long for that repetition, which is that innocence that gives animals the idyllic relationship to paradise that humans are unable to achieve. Let me see if I can get my camera going again. Okay, so there we go. So my camera's back. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to talk about. Whoa, sorry if the audio went crazy there for a sec. I feel like there's still a lot to talk about, but also I just realized that we are almost an hour and 15 minutes into the stream, so also the quality may be degrading. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. It would probably be good to start wrapping things up. Again, this is a whole new thing, and it would be good to continue talking about a bunch of this stuff. But I think for now, it may be good to wrap this up. And I don't know, maybe there'll be another way we can continue discussing this in the future, or maybe I'll do like a part 2 to this live stream. But I feel like at least some of the really major things we got to talk about, and hopefully were interesting and engaging and all that. There were a couple things I just wanted to bring up before we end everything. So this was the first meeting of a few pages, obviously, and this is still a learning process for everything. Yeah, no, definitely, Sam. Let me know what you have to say. I guess I'll wrap up my thoughts on the book real quick, and then I'll look at what you had to say, and we can quickly discuss. So yeah, very quickly, I really loved this book. Not necessarily because it was a fun read, but it was a very interesting and challenging read for a lot of different reasons. And I thought that the writing was phenomenal, was really elevated it into a classic piece of literature. And there are innumerable things to talk about. I mean, just to show you real quick, I had like a big list of things that we could have talked about, but just didn't totally get the time to get to. So anyway, yeah, I thought that it was a really phenomenal book and was very interesting, and there's still a lot to unpack there. And I'll definitely be revisiting it in the future to kind of see how my perspective changes and all of that. I see. Yeah. Yeah, that is very interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how the tone of the audiobook could change the way that you feel about the narrative. But I totally see where you're coming from. And yeah, no, I totally also understand what you mean in the fact that the book is like more enjoyable to talk about in retrospect and to view it after the fact than it is to necessarily like reading it in the moment. Like especially the last third of the book I found very challenging to read, not because of the difficulty of the words, but just the philosophical ideological content. It was like like chewing on like a tough piece of meat or something. It was just very deep and had a lot. There was a lot said in the words. But yeah, no, I'm glad that the discussion has helped you, appreciate the book in a different way. And Sam, thank you for joining. Hopefully, we get some more people in the future. But if not, that's fine too. Like I'm totally happy with just the way things went today. So just a couple more minutes. I just want to say that I'd want to have more in the future, and hopefully, I'm thinking every other month, and we can talk about this more. And I'll post a little thing in the community tab, but we can have like a poll. We can have suggestions about what next book to read. And Sam, thank you so much for joining. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next episode. So take care, and good night in Ireland. So if you're still around, anyone still watching this, I just wanted to say again, I want to make this a regular thing, hopefully bi-monthly, which gives us all time to read the book and digest it, and then have things to come into the discussion with. And then we can all sort of decide together what the next book to read should be. And thanks Sam, take care. And then we can figure out from there. But I think that's really all. That's pretty much the end of the stream. So thank you so much for watching. If you weren't here but you're watching this now, feel free to drop in next time, and hopefully we can pick something that maybe you'd be more interested in reading or have more time to read. We don't always have to read philosophically challenging books. They can be interesting other stuff, fiction, nonfiction, whatever whatever we think is interesting. But thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for joining the live stream if you were here, and I think that's all. So again, this is an evolving process. things will change as I do more streams, as I figure out the format more. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right.